For the sake of transparency, I would just like to say that I am a huge fan of Fullmetal Alchemist. The anime, the second anime, the manga. I love me some goddamn Fullmetal Alchemist. I also just want to kind of get out into the open that I am not the type of person who gets upset whenever a beloved franchise of mine gets a shitty live-action adaptation. The Last Airbender, Dragon Ball Evolution, The American Ghost in the Shell. Terrible movies that completely miss the point of their source material, but whatever. They don't affect the iterations of those franchises that I love. They are separate products as far as I'm concerned. All that being said, I hope you guys understand that I'm not speaking from a place of bias when I say that the live-action FMA film is unrepentant garbage. It is incompetently made to the point to it's just bewildering that this thing exists in the form that it does. If I were to compare this film to anything, it would be the previously mentioned Last Airbender, where it pretty much commits all the same sins that that film did and even then some. Taking a long format story and hyper-condensing it into a feature-length film? Check. Characters that are boiled down to exposition machines that lack any of the emotional weight that their original counterparts had? Check. Horrible, stiff, wooden, stilted acting? Check. Now, as much of a mess as The Last Airbender was, at very least I could say it was cogent. I could understand what was going on. Yes, it was flat, yes, it was boring, but I was able to at least follow the course of events. Here, I can't even do that with this film because it just moves from scene to scene so quickly and with not enough context leading into each scene. Within the first 26 minutes of this movie, I was tweeting out about how, man, this is the worst anime adaptation I've ever seen. This is way worse than, say, Dragon Ball Evolution. By the 1 hour mark, this movie was now contending with Batman v Superman as the worst movie I have ever seen, and it only got worse the longer it went on. And you can kind of tell that you're in for a bad movie right from the beginning of the film. Everything is very flatly shot, very evenly lit. It looks like a TV show from the goddamn 90s in terms of its production quality. With the exception of Alphonse's CGI armor, which actually looks shockingly impressive, but when juxtaposed with everything else that just kind of looks like goddamn garbage, it's kind of jarring and stands out for how good it looks. Because of the brisk nature of which the story speeds by, a lot of scenes that should be emotional and heavy-hitting are devoid of any weight that they had in any other incarnation of this story. When Trisha Elric dies at the very beginning, it's met with this odd kind of faint thud that actually elicited laughter from me and my friends because it was just kind of comical in the way it was shot. Even though she just died, I'm supposed to feel sad for these characters, but because, one, the kids can't act for goddamn shit, and let me just say that I understand that I do not speak Japanese, I do not understand the nuance of the Japanese language and what actually makes a good and bad performance. That being said, I can at very least recognize very stilted, bland, emotionless line delivery. Apparently, bad child actors is a universal language. So then when they go to resurrect her mother, it goes in a very weird direction where the house rips apart and there's a swirling tornado and the floor breaks apart and Alphonse gets kind of spun off into this tornado. He's like, Alphonse! And then it kind of shatters the thing that Ed is on and he blows off and then this... Now, something I forgot to mention in the initial recording is that sequence of them transmuting their mother and how they get blown away. Well, later on in the movie, Ed has like a dream sequence where he's like reliving that event, but like what he's reliving is actually how it was depicted in the manga. Yeah, he sees the truth, and his brother's gone, and then like his mother is like this goopy husk in the middle of the floor. But the thing is that we know that that couldn't have happened because we saw how it happened originally, and like the house was destroyed. Here, that room wasn't destroyed, and also, Ed is like older Ed, like teenage Ed, not little kid Ed. So like this flashback, like hallucination nightmare thing doesn't even like coalesce with the events that we saw originally. It's like this weird bit of like, oh, well, we changed, how that scene went, but then they went back and showed us how it was in the manga/anime, but it doesn't, like I said, coalesce with what was... Who is this fucking made for? It doesn't make any goddamn sense. Okay, back to Other Me. It's the thing that Ed is on and he blows off, and then it's the title card, and then we're in Lior. And yes, I realize it's not actually called Lior in the movie. I don't give a shit what the hell the movie calls it. I'm not gonna fucking try to pronounce that weird, poorly romanized version of that name. It's Lior. God damn it. And this movie then hard cuts us right into the end of the Lior conflict, where they're chasing after Father Cornello, and there's no real emotional impact. We understand that, okay, like, these guys have hand clappy powers. Like, if you're not a fan of FMA already, you're not going to have any context for what's going on. Which also kind of brings me to the, who the hell is this movie made for? Because if you're a fan of Fullmetal Alchemist, you're just going to be disappointed by how terrible a representation of Fullmetal Alchemist this is. And if you're not a fan of Fullmetal Alchemist, you're not going to understand what's going on because of how shoddily everything is explained to you. Going back to the Father Cornello stuff, this is some of the most shoddy filmmaking I've seen. Because it jumps from Ed and Cornello have a bit of a conflict. Cornello uses the Philosopher's Stone, attacks Ed, Ed gets away, and then he runs down a hall, confronts Cornello a second time, he uses the Philosopher's Stone, he runs away, I guess, because they never actually show Cornello running away. It's just Ed runs down some halls and then boom, he's met up with Cornello again. So yeah, the editing in this film, the sense of spacing in shots is so terrible, especially for action sequences or any scenes that are supposed to have any kind of sense of tension to it, because you can never really tell where characters are in one given shot or another. Sometimes characters will just completely walk away from a scene, and you can't tell until a few seconds into that scene, where either we get a wide shot that just shows, oh, they're not in this room anymore, or it cuts to those characters in another location where we go, oh, I guess they left? But this opening sequence is literally just the same action beat over and over again. Cornello uses the Philosopher's Stone. Ed does some fucking alchemy bullshit to get around it. He reconvenes with Cornello. Then he does some more alchemy shit, and Cornello gets away. And then they reconvene in the middle of a crowded city, where I'm wondering where all these people were prior, because before they were just kind of running through an empty alleyways and stuff, and there's just nobody around. And then all of a sudden, big populated city that they're in the middle of, where before there was absolutely no one. So after the cat and mouse back and forth chasing with Cornello and Ed exposes him for being a fraud and all that bullshit or whatever, Mustang shows up with the military to take Ed away, and for some reason Alphonse stays behind and he starts fixing things up while his brother's being carted off. And this then leads into two of the film's major problems. One I already mentioned with the exposition, where characters just kind of word vomit information to other characters so that way the audience understands things. Specifically, the first thing he does explain what alchemy is and how it works. That whole spiel he goes on at the beginning of every single episode, that monologue that he has. Well, here he does that exact same thing, except he's saying it to people, and yet it somehow ends up being worse than a monologue tacked on at the beginning of the story. And characters are constantly doing this, just dumping exposition just to move the plot forward, never giving a scene to breathe or have any kind of emotion to it. The other big problem is that this movie separates Ed and Al constantly. The big problem here is obviously that this story is a story of the Elrics. It's about their emotional connection, their bonds as brothers, and their journey together to restore their bodies. Most of this film is spent following Ed, but Ed spends so much of the film separated from his brother, probably because the CGI for his brother was really goddamn expensive, so they cut him out of as many scenes as possible. You have Winry going with Ed to go find Marco to learn about the Philosopher's Stone, not his brother, where his brother stays behind with Shao Tucker, who then gives him this existential crisis about how he might have fake memories. Why the hell does Shao Tucker do this? Fuck if I know. It just seems like this weird random dick move that he does. And speaking of Marco, this is a perfect example of how some story elements are so poorly truncated. From the point that Marco was introduced to the point that he is killed off in this movie, yes, he is introduced and killed off in this movie, is 4 minutes. From the moment you first see Marco to the moment that Marco dies, 4 minutes has transpired within the film. To the point where it makes me wonder why they even bothered incorporating his character at all. Yes, he gives him the information he needs to know about Lab 5, and that leads to the finale of the film much later. But they could have done that any other way. They could have just had him researching, and he starts going through notes and starts finding out things about Laboratory 5. He didn't have to have Marco go, Laboratory 5, bleh, and then fucking die. Once again, much like The Last Airbender, it's choosing fidelity of story, or at least fidelity of the story beats, in favor of telling a cogent narrative. This movie is an excellent example of why fidelity to source material isn't always a good thing, especially when you're dealing with long format storytelling like FMA. It's why you need to alter events from the source material, cut out superfluous things, condense ideas, condense characters to tell a more cogent narrative that fits within a 2-hour goddamn time frame. And it's not even just like, oh, well, it's super faithful. No, like, it changes plenty of things, but just, it changes weird superfluous things. Like, Shao Tucker, after creating the Nina Chimera, ends up being, like, the main villain at the end of it until he dies, I think. Honestly, I don't remember. So something else I forgot to mention was the whole Nina Tucker thing. Yeah, that's never resolved in this movie. Like, the military carts off Nina Tucker, you know, Chimera Nina Tucker, and it's never resolved. Like, Scar never shows up to, like, her or anything. It's never, like, touched on again. Scar doesn't even show up in this movie. My friends and I were talking about, like, what's going to be, like, an end credit scene. And then, you know, my buddy Bob was just like, yeah, I bet it's, like, you know, going to be, like, the Nina Tucker scene. That's how they're going to end this movie. I was like, oh, probably. It's going to be the post-credit stinger. Couldn't even do that. So the Nina Tucker thing, one of the most poignant things is not only completely rushed through, but it is just swept under the carpet right after it happens. Fuck me. I kept checking out of this movie. Like, I watched this movie with 2 other people, and they could barely recollect all the things that were happening just because of how much of a jumbled mess this movie was. Honestly, I could keep just going on and on and on and on about all the things this movie fails at. Like I said, the cinematography is flat and boring. The actors are stilted, and they don't even have any, like, lines to deliver. It's just exposition and story beats. The action sequences aren't visually interesting. You would think, like, characters clapping their hands and manifesting things and having awesome battles would be really cool. But no, it's done in the most flat, boring, lifeless way possible. And once again, the closest parallel to the action sequences in this movie would be to compare it to The Last Airbender, where you take a concept that, at its very core, is fucking awesome and a visual feast for the goddamn eyes, and then you just boil it down to the most boring, sterile, uninteresting iteration you possibly fucking could. Like, the acting isn't so bad that it's funny. The visuals aren't so bad that it's funny. Nothing is funny in this movie. It's just boring and bland. Things go balls to the wall off the fucking rails in the last act of the film, and yet somehow that is still boring because it is done in the most boring, flat, uninteresting way possible. This film is such a jumbled mess. I don't understand how the hell it got made, once again, in the form that it did. Like, FMA should be one of the easiest things to translate to film. Just get some great fight scenes, some great choreography, some good special effects, and, like, the story should lend itself very well to a film, especially to, like, the live action medium, especially if you're, like, adapting, like, the tone of, say, like, the 2003 series, which had more of a grounded feel to it than the over-the-top spectacle that was Brotherhood. You could easily translate that as almost a near one-to-one parallel and make a live action film out of that. But here, this fucking movie just fails every step of the way. By the end of this movie, my friends and I were trying to quantify if this movie were worse than Batman v Superman, because we were like, okay, well, they're both just, you know, a bunch of story beats tied together, a lot of exposition, not really any kind of emotional character moments. Both of them kind of miss what made the source material great. But the one thing I could say about Batman v Superman is that it has that great fucking warehouse fight scene with Batman, and it has the Wonder Woman theme. Those are at least 2 things that I could say in favor of Batman v Superman. There is nothing I can say in favor of the Fullmetal Alchemist movie. It has not even that minute of a merit going on. The only reason I don't definitively declare this film outright worse than Batman v Superman is that Batman v Superman was offensive to me as a viewer, as a fan of the material, as someone who paid for a goddamn ticket and sat in a theater and wasted 3 hours of my goddamn life there. Like, that movie offended me on a deep personal level. This movie, it didn't offend me, it just bored me. And I was just in bewilderment the entire time of how someone could be this bad of a filmmaker. When I talk about, like, just the filmmaking on a technical level, how terrible this movie is, unless you really see it for yourself, you won't really understand. Because the way shots are framed, the way they cut from scene to scene, the way they show, like, Maze Hugh's death. When you have that scene of him being shot, it's shot in this bizarre kind of way where, you know, we see, like, part of it, and then it cuts back to a flashback later on showing you the rest of it. And it's just like, well, wait, why did you do that? And the movie is full of weird little edits like that. Oh god, I just realized why they framed the Maze Hughes thing like the way that they did. Because they were trying to fake you out and make you think that Roy Mustang was actually a secret villain and that he was killing Maze Hughes. So that only works if you've never seen Fullmetal Alchemist. Thing is, though, if you've never seen Fullmetal Alchemist, then you wouldn't understand a lot of the story beats because of just how shoddily they're pieced together in this film. So once again, I ask, who the fuck is this movie made for? Okay, I'm interrupting myself just one more time to say, the more I think about this movie, the more I just think about how fucking incoherent it actually was. Like, I realize just how much I actually understood only because I was a fan of FMA to begin with. Like, Automail, the idea of it is just completely brushed over. We kind of get, like, the idea of, like, okay, Winry is his mechanic, but we don't notice he comes from, like, a long line of Automail engineers, so that Automail is really, like, a thing in this universe. Only that, like, Ed seems to have these mechanical limbs, because no one else has Automail in this movie. The concept of the state alchemists, what they are, how they function, how Ed became a state alchemist. None of these things are even really fucking touched on. Like, I realize, like, the only reason I even understand these things is because I've seen FMA. If you are new to this, it won't make sense. And once again, you know, like, you have things like the Maze Hughes fake out, which only works if you're not a fan of FMA. So, who is this movie made for? Okay, other Zeon, wrap this shit up. It's bad. It's really fucking bad. Look, it's a bad movie. Go watch it. I'm not gonna be one of those guys that are like, oh, this movie's terrible, don't watch. No. Go ahead and watch it, because you're probably not gonna believe me. Oh, it's just another guy rambling on the internet bitching about a fucking movie. Just watch it for yourself. It's bad. It's really goddamn bad, but don't take my word for it. Go watch it yourself. It's on Netflix. It's easy to go check out. Enjoy. Till next time, Zeon, out.